Good evening. Welcome to one more episode on the deVere webinar series. My name is Armando. For those of you who have been following our previous webinars, probably you can tell that I'm a different host from today's presentation. That's because we're switching, and tonight we're going to focus on how to invest £50,000 in UK property as an expat. Before we go on this and jump into the actual presentation, I want to share a little bit of what's going to be the logistics of the webinar. Also, for those who are here in China, I think many of us are. I hope you are getting ready for your October holiday, national holiday. I know that there's going to be around 600 million people traveling this year within China. So that's a big movement compared to what we all experienced back in early January, February during Chinese New Year. So for those of you traveling, enjoy your holidays, enjoy your break, and hopefully this is a good way to finish off your working period before having a nice release from work and stress from being here. So just to go over the format, we're gonna have a poll, which is gonna appear in a moment. And after that, we're gonna jump into the presentation. For tonight, we're gonna have William Trayford, who is usually our host of the event. He is the area manager for deVere China and also a UK property specialist. So he's gonna be sharing some insights, also some experiences from himself and also some clients on how to invest as an expat in this market. And after that, after the presentation, we're gonna come back to the poll just to see what are the results that all of you share with us. And we can jump into the Q&A, which is, I would say this is one of the most interesting parts. And not that the presentation won't be itself as well, but this is when you can also share your actual questions. I know I will be sharing also mine as well. And here's where you can actually get even more knowledge on how you can apply this. So at the end of the presentation, you also have the opportunity to express your interest in case you still need to get an answer or something that applies specifically to you. So you can also have a chance to say, yes, I would like to speak to someone from deVere just to get more insight on this. So for your comments, you feel free to leave them in the chat box. For those who haven't used Zoom before, which probably there won't be many like that, I think many of us have been using it for a while already. So you have the chat box, but a very important tool that I want you to all use is whenever you send your question, before that, click on to, and instead of just having all panelists, select all panelists and attendees. Why? Because this way everyone can then see what you're asking, and this can also lead to even more questions. So that's very useful to make the webinar more interactive in a way. So without further delay, let's welcome William Trayford.
Hello, thank you, Armando.
Thank you for having us, being with us tonight. I'm very interested on what you're about to share. And can you just briefly say something about yourself before we actually jump into the poll?
Yeah, I mean, really, this webinar came about because I actually came about from a WeChat post. I recently bought a property in Birmingham, and people wanted to know, how did you do it? What was the process? How did you go about doing it? So I thought, well, what a great webinar topic to talk about my own experience. And obviously, I've been helping clients do this anyway. So just, yeah, that's where it came about, really. So it's all things that I've been through and the decisions I had to make myself.
Yeah, it sounds like a very organic topic, because this is a very common question I also get from friends, clients, and even myself, right? So, okay, I know you're gonna be sharing even more on that. So before we do that, can we just start with the poll? So for all the attendees, you're gonna see something popping up on your screen. So the question is, what's the biggest challenge you see investing in property as an expat? So you can get, well, you have a couple of options. One is managing the property and getting a mortgage. Now you're living in China, and whether you're looking at the UK or maybe another market, maybe getting a mortgage could be a challenge for you. doing the research, or something else. So please feel free to vote. We're gonna come back to that poll at the end of the presentation. And without further, now the stage is yours, Will.
Thank you so much, Armando. Excellent. Yeah, and thank you. Like I said, this is really coming about just speaking from my own experiences, also things that clients have gone through, and a lot of the typically asked questions that my clients ask and everybody asks. So what I'll do is I'll just get away and hopefully have lots of questions by the end of it. That's my main goal, to give lots of information, but also to create more questions. So I just want to make it very clear that at the start, we need to make a couple of assumptions, just so that we're all on the same page. You all know what we're talking about. So first of all, today I'm going to be going over investments. Okay. Now, property. Obviously, I know that we can be quite emotional about property, and we've all presumably lived in a property at some point. And we're not talking about homes today. Okay, we're not talking about somewhere where you're going to live in the future. We're not talking about living somewhere near your grandparents, near your parents, or anything like that. We're literally looking at an investment. And therefore, we need to look at it as an asset, and therefore we need to be unemotional about it. Okay, we need to look at the numbers. We need to be very clinical about how we are making this investment decision. Okay, as we make that very clear, we don't want to be too emotional when we're looking at making investments. Okay, and also we need to make sure that when you're making any investment, that you have an emergency fund. You have cash in place in case everything goes wrong. You lose your job, other issues arise, and you have your emergency fund there. Talk to a good financial advisor, talk you through the many steps and how much you may need for an emergency fund, but that's very important. We're investing £50,000. If you've got £50,001, does not mean you should go out investing £50,000, obviously, but we want to make sure that we're all thinking about that, and it's not about just getting to that and investing it all. You need to have some cash reserves in place as well. Okay, so really, when we're coming to how do you invest £50,000, actually, we're going to start at the end. What do you want to achieve from this investment? What is your goal? What's the outcome you want from this? Okay, because that's very important to understand what that outcome is, and then you can start to make the correct decisions at the beginning. Okay, so what do you want to achieve? Are you trying to build a pot for retirement, building up a lump sum that can buy something later on, or you can live from that somehow? Are you looking to get an income? Property is very good to getting the income and providing income for your life. Is that one of your goals? Are you looking to just pass on wealth to your kids, to other family members? Okay, really need to understand what you're trying to achieve and what it is the goal is of making this investment, because that will really direct the way that you invest into property. It's not just simple as saying invest in property, and as we're going to go into a lot about today, it's actually the how and the type of properties as well that you might be investing in, the strategy involved. Okay, so what do you want to achieve? And then you need to say, okay, once you know the real end goal, then there's a couple of sub questions, and really the three keys, I think, of how to make that property decision. So first of all, are you looking for income, or are you looking for growth? Now, I know the majority of you looking at this probably going to say, well, I want both. Now, everyone always wants income and growth. And of course, actually, most property investments, you should be looking for a balance of both anyway. But what's the main focus? Okay, so someone that's focusing on income might be a couple of years away from retirement, or literally already retired and wants an extra income stream. They've got their pension, they've got their other assets, and they want to use a property to give them an income stream to supplement their other income streams that are coming in. Property is a great vehicle for that. But if you are 10 years, 20 years, even 30 years away from retiring, do you need income? Is income actually important to you? Or are you much better off investing in order to get growth, to get leverage growth, which I'll go into later? Is that a more important factor to you? You really need to decide what's more important, because actually it's not going to be the situation where the property that's giving you the most amount of income, i.e. the highest rental yield, is also going to be the property that's going to have the most capital growth. Very rare that that's the same property, and therefore you need to choose your investment strategy and where you're investing depending on which of those are your goals. Okay, I just want to give you an example. I took this from an estate agency, and this is London, and it's a very mature market, and okay, that's obviously a lot of colors and probably some quite small numbers on that screen. But I just want to highlight here is that the change in rental yields and the change of income. So if you were investing for income, that central London there, the real middle of London, even probably going out to most of zone 2, would actually, you'd barely be getting 3% as an income. And that's not going to provide you income realistically or anything that you want in retirement. So those kind of investments, now for income would not be right. We're looking at the edge of London where you're looking at the 4.5% up to even 5% in certain areas are producing a high amount of income. However, will they also be the areas that are getting the most capital growth? Now, maybe. I mean, London is a different kind of market, and at the moment it's going through an evolution, a lot of investments going in to the edge of the city. So maybe there are areas which are on the higher end of the rental yield and also giving you good growth. But it's really important to look at them and say, okay, high rental yield does not equal high growth. And different areas will offer different things. And also, this is looking at, whole London boroughs. Within that borough, and people that are from London will know that, some of the nicest areas are next to some of the worst off areas as well. So you really need to be going very minute and very detailed, looking into each area and understanding, is this an area I'm investing in for high income, or is it an area I'm investing in for capital growth? Okay, so just be very aware of that when you're making investment decisions. Should I use a mortgage? Very common question, okay? So most of us understand the concept of a mortgage. Most people that have owned property that they lived in would have used a mortgage to buy that property. And especially if you are living in that property, it does seem like a debt. And, perhaps it is a debt. But what we need to look at is good debt and bad debt. Okay? And with a mortgage, when you're investing, it's in property, it's very much a good debt. We've got the lowest ever interest rates in the UK, and most parts of the developed world have got some of the lowest interest rates they've ever had. Central banks are coming out and saying that they're going to stay low for a very long period of time, which is great for investors in property. It's not great for people that are holding cash because your money is earning nothing in the bank, but it's great for investors in property. It means you can borrow at a very low cost, but also you're putting that to work to actually get increased growth on your investment. Okay, we talk about leveraging. I don't want to use too much jargon. I don't want to confuse people, but let me just show you an example of why using a mortgage to making a property investment is an incredibly wise thing to do. And in fact, to be perfectly honest, most experts you speak to will say the main reason that property is an excellent investment, or is one of the best investments that you can make, is because of leverage, because of using a mortgage. Let me just give you a few numbers to show you how that works. So we're going to take an example of a £170,000 property. Okay, this is very close to the property price that in fact, our base is pretty much on the investment that I made. Okay, so £170,000, you would have to put the cash in to buy it outright, all in cash. So we're looking at the property worth £170,000. The net rental income, so that's after the cost of a management company, after the service charge and things like that. So the net coming in would be £600 a month, which is 4.2%. So we're also going to assume that over the next 6 years is going to grow 30%. Okay, so that's roughly 5%, obviously with compounding, but let's say it's 30% over 6 years, which means the property will be worth $221,000 in 6 years' time. Just to give you an idea, Birmingham is growing sort of 34, 35 over the last 6 years. Manchester, 36% roughly. So these are realistic figures, conservative figures, but just to give you an idea. So you invested 170,000, got a rental income in that time of £43,200. Obviously, the property has grown 51,221 from 170. So the total profit of 94,200, which is a return on investment of 55.4%. Not bad. You would take that, of course. But let's look as if you were investing with a mortgage. Okay, so we're going to use the 30-70%, a very typical percentage, the 30% deposit, 70% borrowed from the bank, 70% mortgage. Okay, so you're putting 51,000 in. I hope you'll excuse me the extra £1,000 for the investment. £119,000 mortgage. So that's an investment, obviously, of 51,000. What we're going to assume here is actually that the rental, the amount of coming in rent, is just matching the cost of the mortgage, the interest rate on the mortgage. Okay. In reality, you would be actually receiving extra income in that period of time. But also on the flip side with Investor A, we didn't assume any growth in the rental income either. So we'll keep it fairly balanced. We'll go more on the conservative side. But let's just say that rent equals mortgage for this example. So that 51,000 growth there, 170 to 221 is 51,000 growth. So total profit of 51,000, return on investment 100%. So by using a mortgage, we've got a return on investment of doubling your money versus 55%. And that's not taking into account the extra rental income that you would have received as well. Now, the way that this works is that the more growth there is on the property value, the bigger that gap becomes, okay, the leveraged amount. Because what you've got to remember is when you buy a property and you get a 70% mortgage, you're actually borrowing £119,000. The bank doesn't own 70% of your property. They own £119,000 of your property. The growth is yours. That's the important thing to remember. So the more growth there is, the more leverage growth you're getting on your investment. Very powerful tool for investment. And always we would recommend, especially at the moment with low interest rates and being able to lock those in for quite a long time, is actually, it just makes complete sense to be using a mortgage. The next key, what's my time horizon? Because that will also affect how you invest. So some people use property to invest in a very short period of time. So they might say, okay, I only want to invest for a year or two. What type of investments would they be making? So they would maybe be going into what they would probably need to do is go and find something that's incredibly undervalued in a market, buy that property, spend some money on that property, doing it up and improving it because it's probably something wrong with the property structurally or whatever, and then putting it back on the market either to sell or potentially to remortgage and take equity out. Okay, that's the kind of short-term property strategy. Your standard buy-to-let strategy, if you're looking at a 1, 2, 3 year horizon, you may not really make much of a profit on it, and markets don't go up in a straight line, so it's an unreliable strategy to go in with. So you need to understand what your time horizon is with this. I would usually recommend for any investment should be 5 years minimum, but ideally 10 years plus. Okay. I just want to give you an idea. Now this is the 18-year property cycle. I'm not going to delve into this. It's a huge topic. It's a webinar in its own right. But just to keep it back of your mind that markets go in cycles. Okay. Property prices in general do rise roughly with inflation. Just the average property would rise with inflation, and they go in cycles. So as long as you're in the market for a long period of time, then you will see those property prices rise. Okay, but it should be, in most cases, especially for an expat who's not realistically going to be doing the flip kind of strategy, that actually you should be a medium to long-term investor. Okay, so that gives us an idea about what we need to be doing and what the questions we need to be asking ourselves in terms of what we need to be looking for in an investment and what our strategy is. But we are expats. We are not living in the country, or maybe you're looking to invest in China, but here we're talking about the UK. So what do we need to know being an expat? All right. You're managing it from abroad. Okay, so you're managing it with a 7 or 8 hour time difference, a 12-hour flight if you can get on a flight. So it's a very difficult process to do. You're not going to be going down the streets when the boiler's broken and going in there to fix it. So you want to make sure that you've got a very easy hands-off investment. Okay, so we like new builds for that reason. You get guarantees, things are less likely to break, which is a good peace of mind being a long way from the investment. You also need to make sure that you've got a good team in place. You've got a letting agency managing it for you, running the management of it. Things go wrong, whatever happens, this is life. Void periods. So there's people there advertising that property and getting them in, helping you with viewings, doing that whole process. You need to have a team there, a letting agent, tax people, all these kind of people that are helping you manage it from abroad. Because really what you want to do with this kind of investment, yes, you need to have some hands-on. This is not a complete hands-off investment. Property never is. But as hands-off as is reasonably possible. Get involved as little as possible, and that's how you'll be able to manage it effectively and be able to grow potentially a portfolio of investments. Mortgages, they can be more difficult. Realistically, as an expat, you'll need to be borrowing £100,000 plus. So that mortgage value needs to be more than £100,000 for most lenders to be looking at you. Some other people may be able to get some differences, but in general, we're talking £100,000 plus. So at 70%, you're therefore looking at around about £150,000 property value. That's where you need to be starting at, okay, as an expat. You'll also end up with a slightly higher interest rate, realistically, than a local there in the UK, but not too bad. Probably about 1% higher than you would if you're doing the local market on average. Okay, so it is an extra factor. There are less lenders, but more and more lenders are coming to the market for expats. Go back 5-6 years, you would have struggled completely. You would just really found it difficult to get a mortgage full stop as an expat. Now, more and more lenders come to the market. We've got a brokerage in the UK specializing in expats. That's how much of a market there is now for it. But there is a little bit more difficulty for expats. And tax is a consideration. So it really, this is obviously a topic always where it comes down to the individual. What's your income? Do you have other income in the UK? Do you need to be thinking about putting them into company structures or managing it in a certain way? You may need a tax advisor in the UK if that's the case. If this is your only asset in the UK, it should be fairly easy just to do a tax return online. The first one will probably be tricky, but once you've got the hang of it, it's relatively straightforward. But it is something you always need to consider and be aware of, that you're not going to suddenly put yourself in a bad tax situation. Okay? Just things by being an expat, you're not in the normal structure. You just need to be aware of when you're making property investments. Okay? But really, I think with all of these things, having a team in place, using experts, and getting them to sort your situation out and understand your personal situation will help make the whole process a lot smoother. So now we look at the property. All right, what are we looking for? What are the fundamentals when you're making a property decision? Now, this is going to go back to my process. Okay, what was I looking for when I was making the property investment? So we went back on those goals. What was William Trayford looking for? Now I'm looking for growth. I'm a long way from retirement, so I want capital growth as my main priority. However, I know that I'm got a 70% mortgage. I'm using interest only, and it's about 4.5% because I'm a first-time buyer. So I need a decent amount of rental yield as well, because I want to make sure that I'm a little bit cash flow positive. Bare minimum should be neutral. Okay, so I'm looking for that kind of fundamentals. I am using a mortgage. Theory's shouting at me, but also my time horizon is long. I'm looking for long-term growth, 15-20 years plus. Okay, so what are we looking for? An area that's got infrastructure projects. Okay, an area where they are building key infrastructure, ideally government-funded infrastructure. What are we talking about there? We're talking about transport. We're talking about investment into shopping centers, media, business areas. Okay, big infrastructure, big money, investments being made into that area, which is going to mean that there's going to be a lot of business there, and there's going to be a lot of jobs, and therefore there's going to be a rental demand in the area. That's what we want. And actually, do we want something that's already at the top of the market, that's already built? Not really. We want to see that it's coming, but it's not quite there. There's still potential for growth. The market hasn't already moved too far. We're getting in, not completely obscure, and it could be another 5-6 years before we see any lift off. We want to see that market starting to go, and we're on the right track. The plane's off the ground, and we're getting part of it. Okay, that's what we're looking for in terms of infrastructure projects. We're looking at the population. Okay, who's living there? Ideally, we want people that are young, just coming out of university, well educated, young professionals that are looking for somewhere to rent. Realistically, we know that people are not buying properties till at least their mid-30s now. Most people coming out of university, so there's that generation rent coming out of university for at least 10 years, and they're renting. That's who we're targeting. Okay, so it needs to be in good areas where they're earning a decent income and want a nice quality apartment to be living in, and not the kind of tenant that's going to be wrecking it ideally as well. There's no guarantee of anything in this world. Doesn't matter because you're earning a good income, doesn't mean you're not going to wreck a property. But you know, that's what we're kind of looking for, is a more young professional market. Okay, And ideally a growing population as well, not a city that's on the decline. A population that's growing, people are moving to that city because there's job creation in that city, and that comes back to the first point as well. Transport links, so infrastructure projects, when we're talking about that, it's, you know, we're looking, that's very big macro picture. This is also on the micro. What, you know, is there a tube station nearby, a tram stop, a bus stop, areas that are going to get you from where that is to the recruitment areas, to airports, to big train stations. Okay, we want to make sure that the local transport is there as well, and that it's not cut off. It's kind of in the good area, but it's not quite in a prime area where it's going to be easy to get around the city. Fundamentally, we're going to be looking at cities. And then you need to make sure that the numbers work out. Okay, so one, the growth potential is there, so we're not buying in at the top of the market, and, you know, we don't see any further growth in it. And also the rental yields are getting high enough so that actually we know that it's going to cover the mortgage cost, and we're getting a decent bit of income coming in as well. Okay, and also on that, what really, when we look at rental yields, we also want consistency in rental yield. So it comes back to those first 3 points, that actually, because we're getting young renters in and it's a hot market and people are really looking to rent in this area, that actually you're going to get consistent rent coming in, which will also, of course, when you've got a lot of people looking to rent, will push up the rental yields as well. Okay, so there's some of the fundamentals. And here's an example, or here's the area that I look to invest in. Okay, an example that ticks all of those boxes. Birmingham. Okay, the infrastructure project. HS2, there's been a lot of news for very many years about HS2 and when it will be done and what will look, you know, will it ever happen, and lots of problems with it. But it is now moving ahead. And, you know, the building work's happening in Birmingham and in London. What happens going on upwards to the north of England? You know, I'm very hopeful that will happen, but the bits of Birmingham looks nailed on. 2026 at the earliest. So there is that HS2 stop there. The whole Arden Cross site is a huge amount of development going on here. Exhibition centres, international airports, local train stations, business parks, huge employer of Jaguar Land Rover. I know that there's other big employers around in the area as well. The names escape me at this moment. But what we're looking for is this kind of employment opportunities, but also connectivity. Okay, you're going to be connecting into London in 40 minutes from this station. Okay, this is on the outskirts of Birmingham here. All right, so this is kind of government money coming in, local transport. So to give you an idea, the one I bought is just there. Okay, and they've got a new local transport. Okay, so there's some people you may know, it may not go ahead, but the Commonwealth Games 2022 is happening in Birmingham, and they built a bus link that goes directly along this road from Birmingham Airport all the way along that road, past the property I invested in, into Birmingham City Centre. Okay, excellent. They're going to have a proper bus lane. It's going to be like a tram because it'll have its own lane going all the way along. Excellent. Electric buses built for the future. Perfect. Going all the way through. There's talks of trams and everything going out through Birmingham. A lot of money is getting invested in Birmingham because it's so much cheaper to rent offices and live in Birmingham than it is in London. Okay, so this is the kind of things you should be looking for. There's lots of examples around the UK, Liverpool being one, Liverpool Waters, Manchester areas, huge developments going on in Manchester Centre, also Salford. There's lots of examples, but here's an example in Birmingham, which I think is really key and covers a lot of those of the fundamentals that we're looking for. So let's look at the £50,000. How does that work out? How is it even possible to invest in UK property with £50,000? Does it even get you a start? Well, yes, it does. Okay, so what do you need to be looking for? A property worth £150,000. Okay, with all the key fundamentals that we're looking for, and say the one I invested in was 165, but it would still be available at 150 for different types of properties. 30% would be your deposit, 70% would be borrowed from the bank as your mortgage. What does that mean? So 45,000 is 30%. What we're going to have roughly stamp duty, the cost for a lawyer, the mortgage costs, a few other little costs that are in there. Max, you'd be looking at around about £9,000. So a total of 54,000. Okay, excuse my extra 4,000 on there. And then that means you're going to be borrowing 105,000 from the bank. Okay, as a mortgage again, so that gets us over that 100,000 minimum from a mortgage amount as well, which is important. So anywhere between 145 to 150,000 is what we're looking at as a minimum property value. All right. Some of you might be thinking that, okay, I've heard 75% mortgages are possible. Yes, they are, but it might not be for everybody. Some will use a 70% average, but some people are able to get 75% loan to value as well. Okay. So what does that then mean after that? So based on this property, the net rental income after the tenant management fees and all the fees and everything is £582. The mortgage based on 4.5% interest, which is what I got quoted, would be £394, which means get an income of £188 every month. Now, for me, that's not the goal. Whether it's £188 or £288, that's not going to get me rich anytime soon, obviously. But the leverage growth is what I'm looking for. Back to really early on, I'm looking for the leverage growth. I'm looking for the growth in that market because of the infrastructure developments that are going on in the area, okay, that we're investing in. Right, that's what I'm looking for. But to have a bit of extra cash flow coming in is nice. So we know that there's going to be, if there is a void period, I've got a bit of cash to pay it back and I can keep this property moving. All right. So that just gives you an idea of what that really means. So in summary, understand your goals. Understand what you are looking for and the type of property investment that therefore would fit your goals and what you are trying to achieve. So important. You can't just make any old property investment. It needs to fit your financial goals. And any good financial advisor will help you sit down, set out those goals and work out what is going to fit to you and what's going to be the right kind of investment. Maybe property isn't even the right investment. You may like the idea of it, but it might not fit your goals. That's why it's very important to make that clear. Have a team. I think it's important, even if you're in the UK and living half a mile down the road from where you're investing, you'll need to have a team to be working with you and helping you out with these different elements, but even more so living so far away. You need to have a letting agency, realistically. You're probably going to need to use a mortgage broker. Do you need help on the research side? Do you need help looking at finding the right areas, where to invest, what kind of areas you should be looking for, what can you afford, what can you realistically be doing? All these different areas. You need a lawyer to help you with the exchange. You need a team. And you need somebody helping you managing that whole process. It's so important, especially as an expat. Do the research. Even if you work with someone like deVere, you work with us and we come with you and we show you properties that we think are excellent. And, in my opinion, they are. But do your own research as well. Look into them. Understand the markets and why it is that people are recommending different markets for different reasons. Okay. Do your own research as well, because, this is so important. These are big investment decisions. And most importantly, take action. Do it. If you're ready to invest, if you've ticked all the boxes and understand your goals, you know the type of investment, and you're ready to go, now is the time. There's a stamp duty holiday at the moment, so the tax when you're buying the property is cheaper than it's ever been. And also, the market is moving. The market is really moving. It's a great time to invest in. Low interest rates. It really is a perfect time. But only if you're ticking all those boxes, you should be looking to take action and doing it. And with that, Armando, that is me.
That was very, very useful. And even myself, I'm learning a lot from this conversation and this sharing session. So, because I think it's very true that it's not the same buying a home than investing in a property, even though it could be the exact same property or even location, but it could have different purposes. So as you mentioned, it all comes down to your goals. So I take that as my takeaway from tonight's presentation. And before jumping into the Q&A question, I know people are gonna start already sending some questions. Actually, I just saw one. That's good. But let's share the poll. Let's share and see what other people were saying. And we can see that the biggest challenge for expats, at least those joining us tonight, is managing the property. So this is very interesting because this was already answered. It's having a team. So by having a team, you're gonna solve this problem. You don't need your mom living in the same next door to the property you're looking into to do that. Maybe they can do it, but maybe they don't want to, right? Why you're gonna force someone else to do it when you can have a professional team to do that for you? So now, or what is your thought on that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And a lot of people will do that, right? They'll buy something that's convenient because it's near to family, and they'll think that that works out, and that sort of ticks the team element box, and maybe it will for a short period of time. But realistically, problems can happen with a property investment. That they can, and realistically, you do need the ability to fire somebody if they're not doing their job. And are you going to fire your mum if she doesn't make sure that it's rented out 12 months a year or hasn't sorted out the problem with the tenant? You've got to be able to be ruthless in these investment decisions if needed. And it's really, they're worth the wait. A good rental agency is worth the weight in gold. They really are. And for anyone who doesn't know the UK system, it's not the same as China, where they get paid for finding a tenant. They get paid a percentage of the rent. So they're very much in it with you. They want it rented out just as much as you do.
Yeah, so now that you're talking about, this is very specific. Would you say that these concepts that you share are applicable to any other property investment, or is it just UK specific?
No, I think a lot of it is across the board for sure. It's looking at the fundamentals. I think that's very key for any market. You would be looking for that. Looking for infrastructure projects, looking for the right kind of population. There will be regional differences for sure. Some markets are much higher rental markets. Look at Germany, for example, is a big rental culture there. Less so in the UK, but less so in China. I mean, China is very much, you must own property. So there will be different things that you'll look for in the market. But in terms of process and things like that, yeah, for sure, there's a lot of it is transferable.
Okay, that's great. So one question from Kirsty Madison. She mentioned, if you already own a property where the mortgage is paid off and you want to keep hold of it as it's generating good rental income, can you get another expat mortgage with less than 50,000 cash?
Yeah, so she means presumably
so she already has a property, it's being paid off. Yeah, so it's being paid off, so it's already having a good rental income. So I guess whether you can get another mortgage, I don't know if it's on the same property or maybe for a different one, like remortgage the property she already owns.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's
new property.
Really is that really is one of the key strategies to property. We've spoken about a one property strategy there, and we haven't moved on. But really, the leveraging key is actually the property. Yeah, maybe you paid it off, but you've created equity in that property. So maybe the property value has gone up, and you remortgage. So you take out a mortgage on that property. You're taking cash out of that, and then you can reinvest it. So absolutely, if you've got a property there where you've got more money in it than you need to have, and especially something that's rented out, typically a property that's already rented out is a lot easier to mortgage than something that's brand new and coming onto the market, or was residential and is now becoming a buy-to-let. So yeah, absolutely. If you sit there with a property that's rented out and you're thinking, okay, do I need that extra 300 quid a month coming in, or could I actually use that elsewhere and create a portfolio? Absolutely, remortgaging properties is one of the keys to property investment strategies.
Yeah, I think that's a good something new, but I think in this case, because she actually already answered my question, she means to invest in a new property but having less than 50,000 cash. So I think based on the exercise you mentioned, you need at least 100,000 mortgage, right? Correct? So
yeah, I mean, as I say, with everything like this, it will come down to the individual and things like that. They may be able to, you're not a first-time buyer, so that may help you be able to borrow less. But it will come down to the individual, and I think it's worth talking to a mortgage broker about that and understanding what are your options. And it might be a situation where it's not an option at the moment, or it could become an option. But yeah, if it's maybe adding some cash and releasing it elsewhere, different options available. But for sure, it's worth speaking to a mortgage broker about that.
Okay, there's another question. Apologies for my pronunciation, but is Birmingham better than Manchester?
It's Birmingham better than Manchester. I've actually invested in both this year, and I think personally I had a dislike about Birmingham just because I didn't know the area. I didn't really understand it. There was a lot of hype about Manchester in general, but both are great cities for different and similar reasons. Manchester's part of this northern powerhouse, which is creating all the cities together in the north of England to try and combine them, improving transport links between the cities to compete across Europe. So that's it's a great initiative. Again, government-backed incentives. But Birmingham's got the proximity to London and it's a great city in its own right. So there's no is one better than the other. I'd say they're both great places to be investing, among other cities as well in the UK.
It's very interesting that even though you're also in the financial sector, you also have buyer bias, because it's normal, right? We're all humans at the end of the day. So it's normal that everyone is going to have this type of question. And maybe one more before we can conclude this, because of course this is very UK specific, but we know that deVere works with different nationalities, different cultures. So as a non-British or even not even European investor, why would I look at the UK or Berlin, as you mentioned, or somewhere else out of our regions? Like, for those who don't know, I'm from Mexico. There are many deVere clients from other parts of the world. Why and how can we also look at that and not look at another different region for a property investment?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different variables, and I really think that as an international person, international business person,
global citizen,
citizen, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, exactly. You should be making global investment decisions. And I think one of the advantages of some markets over others, it's often the access to mortgages. Really, it's so important that you're not restricted going into a market as an international investor. You also need to look at, are there any punitive taxes placed on international investors? There was a lot of money going into Australia sort of 4 or 5 years ago, mainly from China, but other areas as well, and Canada. So, they put punitive taxes on foreign investments. So you really got to look at where is friendly to foreign investments, where is it easy for me to also be getting a mortgage. UK ticks those boxes, and it's also, you want to be investing really. I mean, we're deVere as a company, we are the safe and steady investors. We're not looking for anything too crazy. So, I mean, a lot of people talk to me about Southeast Asia, and I'm sure there are some good investments in there, but there's an awful lot of risk as well. So we prefer the developed markets, UK, Germany. We've had ones in Ireland before. We've had them in Portugal before. We're looking developed markets because that's where we see safety. And then the fundamentals just tick the box with the UK. You've got the lack of supply compared to demand. It is an island. It's quite a small island. There's a real lack of supply, and there's a good rental market as well. So and for the international investors not owning pound is still relatively low, fluctuating a lot. There's some great opportunities to be had, especially in the last couple of weeks. We've seen the pound start to dip again. So there's some good opportunities for international investors as well.
Yeah, and I think from that I can even also add that from many of us that come from countries where our currency is not that strong as either having a property in pounds or euros, that's also an added value as well, because I'm sure that you can, as you said, there's Southeast Asia, there's many other places where you can still buy properties that are going to grow in value, but maybe the currency won't, right? And now as a global citizen, probably you also want to protect that. Okay, so I think that was very useful.
Well, sorry? Yeah. So just to add on that, you've got to look at the government policies as well. Sometimes they like to say, okay, you're a foreigner, but we're going to take that property away from you because a new government's come in and they're an easy target, unfortunately. So you've got to be careful of that as well. A lot of scams you hear about in Southeast Asia, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very, very important to pay attention to. So I think we can close for that. I think we're gonna receive more questions on the WeChat or somewhere else. We're gonna make sure that you get them and you answer them on our either email or our next post on WeChat. For those who didn't get to watch this live, I know you're gonna watch this in a recording, so happy to answer this later on. Because I don't know, do we still have time for one more?
You tell me. I can't see the time on my screen.
Okay, there's one more coming. Let's make it quick. That what key criteria apply to get to mortgage applicants, so that we can conclude the webinar with this question, because I think this is an important one. How can we actually qualify to be to receive a mortgage as an international investor? Do they give to everyone? Just saying, I live in China.
Not to everyone, obviously. So nationality, they're not very restrictive at all. So really, they're really looking for reliable income coming in. There's no set amount. It will depend on the lender, but let's say 25,000, 30,000 pounds equivalent in RMB per year as an income. You'll need to show that the property, and the number one thing they're actually looking at is the property. Is the property a good property? Is it actually going to be achieving the rental income to cover that? If it's not, then they want to see that you've got supplementary income and a surplus in your income as well to be covering that difference. If it's not something that's going to be washing its own face, as it were, in terms of rental income and mortgage costs. But they'll not really much more criteria than that. There will be individual scenarios where you'll need to, if you've got a bad credit record, for example, they'll want to look at that. But yeah, in general, it's okay. Certain nationalities, I guess, might have issues, but living in China, there's no problems with that. I mean, one thing to take into account, I guess, is that I'm married to a wonderful Chinese lady, and we were deciding whether or not to buy the property in joint names. So I spoke to the mortgage broker, and he said, obviously you can and you will be able to get a mortgage, but he said, Will, as a Brit, you will have more options available if you bought it in your own name. So we just decided that we'll buy it in my own name solely. We'll make sure we write the correct will and everything, so that everything falls to her, if something happened to me. But yeah, well, that's a decision we made because we spoke to the broker, and it wasn't something I was aware of until actually I went down that process. So little things to be aware of, and these sort of questions in terms of can't I get a mortgage, really it's one of the first steps anybody needs to take, because there's no point really in going much further down the road if you can't get a mortgage. So I'd really advise that to be one of the very first steps that people make in terms of looking at property investment.
Yeah, and at the end of that, you said you can do all the research in the world, but you just have to do something. You just take action, right? So how can we reach out? What do you suggest so we can close this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think what we've gone today, and what I really tried to emphasize today, is that there's a lot of information out there, but it really depends on your individual situation. So the best way to go about that is actually say, okay, I need to understand my goals. I need to understand, therefore, what I want to achieve in the longer term. And once I've done that, then I can start to look at the actual investments that are appropriate for me. So if you want to talk to an advisor about property investments, whether it's myself or one of the other deVere advisors that are very knowledgeable on property, or even to talk to a mortgage advisor about your specific situation before taking the next step, all you're going to do is just click yes if you want to arrange a time to speak to somebody, or no if you're not interested at the moment, it's not appropriate. Okay, so just give you the option to do that. And thank you so much for having me, Armando.
Thank you so much for joining and sharing this wonderful conversation. For those who have been joining in a regular basis, I don't know how they feel about watching you now, not as a host, but an actual speaker. Personally, I learned a lot. And at the end of the day, as you said, we just need to make sure that whether this is the right decision or not, but it definitely falls in our financial plan as an individual. Even for myself, I'm looking at this as, where should I do my next investment? Whether that was going to be back home in Mexico, but if I do that, that will be more like a purchase rather than actual investment. So I definitely learned a lot. Be sure to continue joining our deVere WeChat group chat, because that's where we share all the news on what's coming. Also for you to stay connected with us for other type of events that we also do for those living in Shanghai. And finally, just let us know if there's any specific topic that you feel it will be useful for you to learn more. So we're very happy to create new content. This is also a very powerful way to stay connected with our clients and our international friends. So have a good night, everyone. Enjoy the national holidays and stay in touch for the next one.
Yeah.
See you.
Thank you all.
Bye.